Well, it's nice to be back, friends. It's been a couple of days here in service with you and so forth. Peggy and I are looking forward to that. And as the society instructs, we have a 45-minute talk to give, whatever we want to hear. And so I'm happy that you all chose to hear this one again. Reason being, that's one more talk I don't have to get ready. Got enough of them to get ready, right? At any rate, it is quite an interesting little outline. The real Armageddon, why and when, I'll tell you right now, we don't know when. Are we happy? We do not know when. We got an approximation. We've been in that approximate time period for quite a while now. But to get right with the program now, the word Armageddon, as you well know, scares people to death. Why? Because they don't know what it is. Their preachers don't know what it is. The politicians don't know what it is. Anyone that has an idea, mostly they got it from Hollywood, thinking it's an asteroid coming out of the sky somewhere, going to smash into the earth. Some preachers have picked that up since they didn't know what else to talk about, and started preaching that. That's not true. That's not what Armageddon is. Ronald Reagan, I always remember him. He thought it was going to be a war between Russia and the United States, nuclear war. He was wrong too. The fact is, as you well know already, the word only appears once in the Bible, and the one that made the word up knows what it is. That's Jehovah God. We might just as well turn our Bibles there. It's in Revelation 16. It's the only place that this word turns up. Virtually every word in the Bible, friends, as you already know, has a meaning. Almost all words have definite meanings. Now, the definite meaning of the word Armageddon is assembly of troops, mountain of assembly of troops. The secondary meaning is mountain of Megiddo. Now, you can look at any map that ever existed, and you'll never find a mountain of Megiddo. And yet that name, Megiddo, is closely connected with Armageddon in virtually every culture that knows anything about Armageddon at all. The reason is there were indeed decisive battles fought. It's a little old city is what it is, but there were decisive battles fought all around the Megiddo. And so it's just come to be connected with Armageddon, although there's really no connection, just in the mind, as it were. And so, what is Armageddon? Well, the one that made the word up tells us what it is. But let me kind of get you set up again, so you get your mind going in the right direction. When he starts talking about what he's going to call Armageddon, he's describing every single government existing in the year 2000. This is the last of the Lord's day. That's what Revelation is written about. It's today. So he's talking about every government on the earth, including the one in Washington, D.C., and each government and all their constituents, all their supporters, they are being drawn or influenced to move towards Armageddon. They're being influenced from outside sources, but they're going to wind up at Armageddon. Now, incidentally, before we get into this one place it's used, all back here in the Bible, most people call this the Old Testament, literally scripture written in Hebrew and Aramaic, but nonetheless, virtually all of those prophets at one time or another in their writing spoke about Armageddon, but they never, ever used the word. They called it a dozen different things: the great day of God the Almighty, and the Lord's day, Jehovah's day, the day of fire, the day of vengeance. I mean, it's called a dozen different things. But Jehovah God did not coin the word Armageddon until he inspired John, the apostle, to write about the Lord's day. That's the last day. That's our time period. Now let's get into Revelation chapter 16. Now notice first of all verse 14. It said they are in fact expressions inspired by demons. They perform signs and they go forth to the kings of the entire inhabited earth. Now notice that. I said every single governmental head and government in the world today. Entire inhabited earth, but why? Well, to gather them together to the war of the great day of God the Almighty. There's another title. Okay? The war of the great day of God the Almighty. He puts a name to that war down in verse 16. Let's read that. So they gathered them together to the place that is called in Hebrew Armageddon. And there's a one and only place in the entire Bible that that word is used. Now, think about this, friend. When John was inspired to write the Revelation, John was a Jew, no doubt about that. But he did not speak the Jewish language. He did not speak Hebrew. In fact, the Hebrews, for probably 300 or 400 years before John wrote this, had not spoken Hebrew as their general language. It was Greek because of the influence of Alexander the Great. So we have to understand that because of the word in verse 16, it said all these governments of the earth are gathered to the place called Armageddon. Now the word place, the Greek word that's translated place in English, the Greek word is topos, T-O-P-O-S. And that word literally means a situation. It does not mean a given geographical location. Like if you invited somebody to your place for dinner this evening, say, come over to my place, they're going right directly to your house, your address on your street, or whatever. They're going to a location. Topos, place, in this sense, does not mean a location. It means instead a set of circumstances, a situation that's going to exist. And so Armageddon, friends, really, Armageddon is a worldwide situation that's going to involve every nation of the entire earth, every individual on the earth. And if it comes today, there's some 6 billion people on the face of the earth now. So everyone's going to be involved. Armageddon is a war between Jehovah God and his angelic forces and every single government that exists on the face of the earth. That's what Armageddon is. It is a situation that is going to come in the not too distant future. A set of circumstances where God and his forces will fight all the forces of man, all the forces of the nations. Now, one final point about what Armageddon really is. Without a doubt it's a war, but it is a selective war. It's tantamount to Noah's flood, for example. According to scientists, I forget the science that traces cultures backwards, I can't remember the name of them, but nonetheless, they're probably fairly accurate. And they estimated that at the time just before Noah's flood, there were about 20 million people existing on the face of this earth. And so 8 people survived the flood, selective destruction. 20 million people did not. Of the 20 million people, those who did not bother to take the time to line themselves up with Jehovah God's standards. He let everybody know through Noah and his family. But it was a selective destruction. That is exactly the way this Battle of Armageddon is going to be. Rightly disposed people who have brought themselves into line with Jesus Christ, the Son of God, is going to survive. Anyone who has not, a lot of good people who try to walk down the middle of the road, take the best out of both worlds, as it were, they're going to be in for a great big shock. That's what Armageddon is, friends. Next question has to be, why in the world is he going to fight Armageddon? Why is he going to do this? He already did it once at the flood. Why is he going to bring it about again? Answer is real simple. He owns the earth, but he doesn't have control of it. Think clear back to the Garden of Eden. He created Adam and Eve, told them what he wanted to happen, said, I want you to have a bunch of babies and turn this entire globe into a beautiful paradise with perfect people living on forever. Satan come along, talking through the serpent, and all of a sudden, Adam and Eve said, wow, I think I'll change bosses. So they started obeying Satan instead of Jehovah. Right? So now Jehovah could have stepped in there and executed him and built another pair of Adam and Eve, but what would he have proved if he'd have done that? He'd have proved he was tougher than Satan, but then everybody knew that anyway, so he would have proved anything. So he decided just to let it go. I'll get the earth populated. Here we are in 2000, and it's populated. There are some 6 billion, like I mentioned earlier, on the face of the earth, so the earth is populated. It has happened. Now it's time for him to regain control. of the earth. That's why he's bringing Armageddon. He has allowed mankind to choose who they wanted to serve and worship. And it's very obvious, by the way things are going in the world, whom they have chosen. Same when Adam and Eve chose. So at any rate, why is he bringing it? That's why he's going to take back control of his earth. Now, through prophecy, we know that he's going to do that. Actually, it worked out late 1800s, early 1900s. Now, go back to Revelation. This time go to chapter 11. When God began intervening in men's affairs to take back control of the earth, some people just loved it, and other people just hated it. When they saw the intervention begin for him to start taking control, once again, of his earth, notice the ones that just loved it. Find verse 17 in Revelation 11. They said, well, we thank you, Jehovah God, the Almighty, the one who is and who was. Why? Because you have finally taken your great power and begun ruling his kingdom. And there was a bunch of people on the earth that saw God's prophecy being fulfilled, started seeing him intervening in the affairs of mankind to take control of that, and boy, they were happy about this. On the other hand, how about all the kings of the various nations of the world and the people that support them? How did they feel about this intervention? Read on, verse 18. Said the nations became wrathful. See, they knew they were going to get kicked off of their little pedestals. So God's own wrath came, and he appointed time for the dead to be judged, give the reward of the slaves, the prophets, the holy ones, those fearing your name, the small and great. And get this, and to bring to ruin those ruling the earth. The time frame when God began maneuvering, fulfilling prophecy after prophecy after prophecy in essentially our time period, our general time period, our era. A few people loved it, most people hated it. But that's why. They recognized they were going to lose their lofty positions and their big paycheck and all the adoration that goes to politicians and so forth. But you might wonder, how did those few now that knew that it was the time had come for him to intervene, and that he was starting to do it? Well, they knew it because they studied the Bible, and through the operation of the Holy Spirit. Not that they were inspired, to be sure, but they studied in depth prophecy, chronology, put all these things together, and through God's Holy Spirit, they were allowed to understand when this thing was going to happen, approximately. Just as an example, we've been studying in the book of Daniel now. Go back to Daniel chapter 2. He's one of the prophets that that these dear ones back there in the late 1800s studied in depth and come up to a chronological time frame when God was going to start intervening in men's affairs. And when they saw it happening. But this is just one, excuse me, of the visions that that Daniel had, that these brothers studied back there, so that they knew approximately when it was going to happen. Now notice in verse 44, that whole image is talking about various world powers. It gets down almost to our day in verse 44. It said, in the days of those kings, well, that's all the politicians in evidence today. The God of heaven is going to set up a kingdom that will never be brought to ruin. That kingdom will not be passed on to any other people, but notice what God's kingdom is going to do. It's going to crush and put an end to these earthly kingdoms, but it itself is going to stand a time indefinite, or in other words, forever. But these dear brothers and sisters back then were in-depth Bible students. They prayed fervently, just like Daniel did a while ago, begged Jehovah God to allow them to understand, and boy, he acted on it. He did allow them. And so when this started happening, boy, they were ready. They knew it. Go back to Revelation 16 again. Interesting point. I said earlier that these nations, these kings of the earth, don't call them kings anymore much. Mostly they're called presidents or dictators or czars or something or other, but a few kings, but very few. But it means all the world leaders. Said that they were being influenced from an outside source. Let's read verse 13. Excuse me, and notice where three separate entities are identified as being those that are influencing all the governments of the earth. He said, I saw three unclean inspired expressions like frogs come out of the mouth of, number one, the dragon, number two, out of the mouth of the wild beast, number three, out of the mouth of the false prophet. Understand, there are three separate entities now in Revelation that's exercising influence over every nation existing on the face of the earth in the year 2000. Now, who are those three? Well, we studied the Bible enough. We know the dragon, the first entity, is oftentimes Satan is called the dragon. So he has a lot of influence ever since he took control of the earth back there in the Garden of Eden. The wild beast that exercises influence, little doing, little study to figure this out, but it refers actually to the entire political system of things all put together under Satan's control, through which he has dominated mankind for all these centuries of time. But you know yourself, all you have to do is watch the news. All nations of the earth today are totally interdependent upon one another. You know that that is the case. The final one there, the false prophet, exercises a great deal of influence on every nation of the earth. Who's the false prophet, or what is it? It too takes a little research to figure it out, but it winds up being a combination, dual world power, the United States and England. This combination is the false prophet. And you know, once again, who is it that controls the most of the world? In other words, this is the only nation with enough money to give away. And if people don't want to starve to death in some of these other countries, they're going to do whatever the United States wants them to do. So the false prophet is the third and final of these three that's influencing every single nation of the earth to stay in line, in other words. And of course, the unclean inspired expressions, that's simply demonic propaganda that emanates from Satan, who controls all these entities through his demons. Now go back to Revelation 13 for a second. The fact of the matter is, friends, there's a lot of good, honest, hard-working people in this earth. A lot of them right around here in Darlington. What they are doing, many of them unknowingly, unwittingly, but they are actually giving worship to Satan. If they knew they were doing it, they wouldn't do it. But many are doing it. Satan is so good at what he does that he can get it done, and people don't even realize they're doing it. This is done through, I'm going to say, an attitude. Personally, I call it a religion, because whatever people give most of their time to, most of their energy, most of their thinking, so basically that's their religion. But it's definitely a mindset, an attitude. But notice what it is in Revelation 13, notice verse 4. It said, now they worship the dragon, that's Satan. Why? Because the dragon gave authority to the wild beast. That's the political governments, including this one in Washington, D.C. So they worship the wild beast, the government, with the words, who's like the wild beast and who can do battle with it? So now what is the mindset or the religion by which people actually worship Satan unknowingly? It is nationalism. Nationalism. This is taught in the schools right here in Darlington from kindergarten on up. Equate God and country, right? Nationalism is the mentality, my country, right or wrong. My country better than your country, and all that kind of silly juvenile stuff. But nonetheless, this works, and it's worked for generations of time. Many of us here have been involved in it. I certainly was for the first 34 or 5 years of my life. I was very nationalistic, patriotic, thought that was the thing to do, right or wrong, until I studied the Bible and found out who was bossing this thing around. Satan, the dragon. But at any rate, once again, you can see why Armageddon has to be fought, friends. Jehovah lost control of his earth. They're back in the Garden of Eden. It has come around full circle. It's time, he says, to regain control And he's going to do this through Armageddon. Let's go back to one of the other prophets, however, before we leave this segment. Ezekiel. Go to Ezekiel 39. Ezekiel was one who was used extensively by Jehovah God to talk about Armageddon, though he never ever used the word. But notice the ultimate result of Armageddon in verse 7. He said, "My holy name I shall make known in the midst of my people Israel. I shall no more let my holy name be profaned." And here's the key: the nations will have to know that I am Jehovah. Understand, that is such a significant part of the reason for bringing Armageddon, that Jehovah God had this one prophet repeat that very same statement 62 times in the book of Ezekiel. Other prophets use it as well, same statement, but just one of them, Ezekiel, 62 times. So we get the point, friends. By means of Armageddon, Jehovah God's sovereignty is going to be vindicated eternally. We can help sanctify, make holy his name. We can help in that. But as far as the vindication of his sovereignty or his name, we got nothing to do with that. He's going to do that himself at this world situation called Armageddon. Go to Revelation 19 this time. We said that it was a war between Jehovah God's armies and the armies of the earth, and it is. Who's Jehovah God's commander-in-chief, if you will, or field marshal? Well, we'll see in verse 11 of Revelation 19, he identifies who it is. He said, "I saw the heavens open, and look, a white horse," that's righteous warfare, depicting that. "The one seated upon this white horse was called Faithful and True, and he judges and carries on war and righteousness." So now who's the faithful and true? Well, we know from reading the Bible that Jesus is called the Amen, right? What does the word Amen literally mean? Faithful and true. And so it makes it very plain, if Jesus Christ, who's leading the charge at the Battle of Armageddon against all the nations of the earth, is he all on his own in this war? Good heavens, no. Drop down to 14. Also, it said the armies that were in heaven were following him on white horses, and they were clothed in white, clean, fine linen as well. Now these are the faithful, holy angels. Who knows how many helpers he's got? Nobody knows. Well, Jehovah and Jesus know, I'm sure, but none of us know. But it's bazillions of them. He's got all the help he ever would need to fight this war against all the nations of the earth. Incidentally, their being clothed in white, clean, fine linen indicates their purity as well. In other words, they are different from the demon angels that came down to the earth and cohabited with the daughters of men. You recall that? They became demons. These are not the angels that did that. So now, now we know what Armageddon really is. It's a situation. It's no place. It is a situation. It's going to exist all the entire earth. We know why he's going to bring it, to wrest control of this earth back again, to rid the earth of Satan and so forth. What we've been talking about is still in the future. Hadn't happened yet. And so why is it then that Jehovah's Witnesses feel so strongly that we are right at the threshold? In fact, we're on top of the threshold. We are so close now. Why do we feel that way? Well, number one is because we can read. We can read the Bible, we can watch the news and read the newspaper, and we can line the two up together and say, wow, that's exactly what Jesus Christ said was going to happen in the time frame immediately preceding Armageddon. Go to Revelation 12. Faithful and Street Slave, Jehovah's Witnesses organization, has printed an abundance of material, solid proof, chronologically that the last days began in 1914. Jesus was installed on his heavenly throne in 1914. No question about it, that happened. History since then has proved it, even if it wasn't proved before. It has been since then. When Jehovah God put him on his throne, first order of business, he said, Jesus, I'm going to cause the first resurrection to happen before long. I'm going to bring that portion of the anointed ones who are already dead, been dead for 1,000 years or two. I'm going to resurrect them into the heavens. He said, I want to clean heaven. So first order of business, Jesus, you clean up the heavens. So Jesus said, okay, Jehovah, I'll do that. So he went all over the entire universe, wherever they were, no doubt sent his angels, faithful angels, and he picked up every demon and Satan as well, cast them down to the vicinity of the earth and locked them up. They're here with us. Now why do we feel like Armageddon is so close? In verse 9 of Revelation 12, it says, so down the great dragon was hurled, the original serpent, the one called devil and Satan, who's misleading the entire inhabited earth. He was hurled down to the earth, and his angels were hurled down with him. Now think about that, friend. Locked up down here, and I've oftentimes made the comparison of us. We get up in the morning, we take our shower, we get in our car, we go wherever we want to go. I mean, Satan used to be able to do that. See, he could fly clear to Jehovah's throne until this happened. What if someday we got up in the morning and somebody was waiting right there and they stuffed us in the dresser drawer, shut it and locked it up? We would be madder than a wet hen after just a few minutes, wouldn't we? We'd be fixing to bust out. Satan's the same way. See, he's confined to this little teeny old globe is one of the smallest ones in this small galaxy that it happens to be in. Just a very minute part of this universe. And yet Satan used to have access clear up there, and now he's gone. You can see why he's mad. That's why down in verse 12, since he's confined here, he said, on this account you be glad, you heavens, you faithful angels, you who reside in them. But boy, woe for the earth and for the sea of mankind, because the devil's come down to you having great anger, knowing he has a short period of time. Key point there, friends, we know that this took place in 1914, that Jesus took his throne. We know that. As a matter of fact, 38 years before 1914, Jehovah's Witnesses put it in print. Watch out for 1914. This is 38 years before 1914. That something big is going to happen. Don't know exactly what, but something is. Because that's the end of one dispensation in Bible chronology and the beginning of another. They had it figured out. It was the end of the Gentile times, the beginning of the last days, which is going to conclude with Armageddon, the last days time frame. And so, why do we feel like we're so close? Well, we've been in this time frame now for 80-some years. Between 80 and 90 years, we've been here. Things got progressively worse and worse and worse and worse, gone downhill. They get much worse. Somebody's going to blow this stupid earth up. Jehovah's not going to let that happen. So we know, without a doubt, we are extremely close. Jesus gave a rundown of things that were going to happen in this given time frame, right shortly after he took his throne, between then and Armageddon. Mentioned a whole bunch of them, which we're familiar with, starvation and famines and earthquakes and pestilences. And one thing that most people don't like to think about, but nonetheless it's true, Matthew 24, verse 14, Jesus said one of the significant parts of this composite sign is the fact that the good news of this kingdom, his kingdom, the fact that it was established in the heavens in 1940, that's good news. And he said that's going to be preached all over the entire inhabited earth for witness to all nations, and then Armageddon is going to happen. That's what he said. Now, has it been done? You bet your life it has. We have completed it. Are we going to stop? No. There's still a few good people out there. But it has been done to the degree that if the Great Tribulation would come tomorrow, Jehovah's Witnesses have a totally clear conscience because we have it being preached in all nations. It has been done. Once again, not that we're going to stop. That's not the point. But the fact is, that prophecy had been fulfilled, along with virtually everything else. And so we might wonder then, what is next in line? What's coming up next? Well, very interesting, but the Bible answers us. Go to Revelation 17. Revelation chapter 17. Now you'll recall what the wild beast is. It's the collective nations of the earth. The wild beast, incidentally, in the description has 10 horns. 10, the number 10 indicating earthly completeness. And so it's not just the wild beast by itself that is going to accomplish this, but it's going to have help from all of its other national supporters. The eighth king primarily is what we're talking about here, the United Nations. But 10 earthly, all the other nations are going to be involved in this also. But notice this is the next thing now on the agenda to happen. Virtually every other prophecy had been fulfilled. Find verse 16. It says, "And the 10 horns that you saw, and the wild beast, these will hate the harlot. They will make her devastated and naked, and will eat up her fleshly parts, and will completely burn her with fire." Now let's go back. There we have the nations of the earth turning against a harlot. What is a modern day word for a harlot? Some here probably don't even know what a harlot is. Well, today we would call it a prostitute or a whore. And we know what that is, see? That's what he's talking about here. What prostitute is being spoken of? It is Babylon the Great. Now, Babylon the Great got started from Babylon the Tiny or Babylon the Small. It's false religion. But the things that are taught on a worldwide scale in the churches professing Christianity, in addition to the pagan religions, basically what they teach there as doctrine come from Babylon, the Tower of Babel, where God confused the languages. Everybody left and went to a different part of the earth. They took with them their new language, but their old religion. So that's why it's called Babylon the Great. It used to be Babylon the Little. It was just a little old dinky place. But when he confused the languages, man, it's all over the earth. It's right here in Darlington, Babylon the Great. And there, Jehovah God inspired the Apostle John to say that the nations are going to turn on and totally annihilate false religion. That's the next thing in order to happen. Seems kind of like a contradiction in terms, doesn't it? Satan, the boss of the politicians. Satan is the boss of false religion. One destroy the other. Why in the world would that happen? Well, let's go back to Revelation 17, and he tells us why in verse 17. He said, "For God will put it into their hearts to carry out this thought." In other words, they got no choice in the matter. At God's due time, he's going to put it into the hearts of the politicians to cause their armies to turn on and utterly destroy false religion. That's Babylon the Great. Now think about this, friends. I'm not prophesying or projecting nothing, but of the United Nations right now, I forget the percentage, I wish I could remember it, but it's something like 70 to 80% of the nations belonging to the United Nations are already anti-religion. They already hate religion. So you can understand how Jehovah is maneuvering this situation right now. It's going on right under our noses. He's getting the thing ready so that when he says do it, they're going to do it. That's the beginning of what Jesus Christ called the Great Tribulation. Some might not understand the Great Tribulation. Many who come out of Christendom have different ideas about tribulation. Some say 7 years of this and 7 years of that. I've heard it all. So have you. Factually, Jesus Christ is the one that coined the phrase. He said things are going to be worse than ever in mankind's history before. In fact, it's going to be so bad if God didn't cut it short, nobody would be saved. But for the sake of the anointed ones, he's going to cut it short. So the Great Tribulation, friends, is a three-parter. Consists of three separate segments. The first segment is the one we just described. It's the destruction of Babylon the Great. The final segment is Armageddon. That's when he wraps it all up. What's this little teeny one in the middle? Go back to Ezekiel. It's time for 38. Ezekiel is the prophet that Jehovah God blessed by allowing him to talk so much about the Great Tribulation, prophesy about it. In Ezekiel 38, there is an entity called Gog. That's G-O-G, Gog of the land of Magog. Now, Gog is a title that applies to Satan only for a given time frame. Only between the time of his having been cast out of heaven and the center of the earth and his being put into the abyss. Gog of the land of Magog. Where does that tell us Magog must be? The vicinity of the earth, right? Has to be. At any rate, verse 3. You must say, this is what the sovereign Lord Jehovah has said, Here I am against you, O Gog, you head chieftain of Meshech and Tubal. I shall certainly turn you around and put hooks in your jaws and bring you forth with all your military force, horse and horsemen, and so on and so forth. The fact is, God, Jehovah God, is going to put hooks in the jaws of Satan, not literally, of course, but he's going to force him to come against God's own people. This is called the attack by Gog of the land of Magog. That's what it's called. That's the second part of the Great Tribulation. Now, when is it going to take place? Go to verse 16. It said, You will be bound to come up against my people Israel, like clouds to cover the land. And when? Well, in the final part of the days, when it's going to occur. I shall certainly bring you against my land. Why? For the purpose that the nations may know me when I sanctify myself in you right before their eyes. Jehovah speaking, as it were, through Ezekiel to Gog, and he said, You got no choice in the matter, Gog. Hooks, some Bible commentators call these hooks of delusion. He will delude Satan. What does delude mean? It means fool. He will fool Satan, just like he fooled Pharaoh into following the Jews into the Red Sea. Then he executed them all. He deluded, put hooks of delusion in Pharaoh's jaws. He'll do the same thing to Satan. Think about this. Three-part Great Tribulation. Satan has been effectively using the religious system of this world for thousands of years to get people to leave Jehovah and to love Satan. He's been very good at it. When he sees this destroyed at the beginning of the Great Tribulation, totally annihilated, he sees Jehovah's Witnesses still operating, still functioning, sticking up like a sore thumb, doing whatever it is Jehovah tells us to do, makes Satan just mad. Oh boy, it infuriates him to see us still spiritually strong. That's why he attacks us. He attacked by Gog and Magog, the second part. Now when he does that, what did Jehovah say through Zechariah? Said, somebody that picks on one of my people, what did he say? Wham! You've all been poked in the eye one time or another. That's what Jehovah said. Somebody picks on my people, it's like sticking your finger in my eye. He brings Armageddon. End story. That's the way it works. That's the little sequence, friends, that takes place. So we see what it is then that takes place in between this first part and Armageddon. Now go back once again to Revelation 16. That being the case, and when this does happen, it's going to surprise Christendom for sure. But I would imagine that you and I are probably going to be more surprised than Christendom. Why? Because we've been preaching about it for decades, some of us. Nonetheless, the whole world is going to be surprised. He said it's going to come like a thief in the night. Now find verse 15. He He says, look, I'm coming as a thief. So happy is the one that stays awake and keeps his outer garments, so that he may not walk naked and people look upon his shamefulness. He's saying stay awake. Keep spiritually strong, keep spiritually motivated, keep on the right track, see, straight and narrow, because Satan is very good at what he does. He can mislead us so easily. He can con us into thinking we're doing okay when factually we know in the back of our head and heart we're not. But he can con us. He's good at what he does. So they're saying to us, stay awake. Turn to page, chapter 18. When this thing happens, friends, the first part of the Great Tribulation, notice the last part of verse 10 in Revelation 18. Too bad, you great city, Babylon, you strong city, because in, get this, 1 hour, you've measured it. Does he mean 60 minutes? Who knows? Doesn't matter. The fact is, quick. It's going to be extremely quick. The two things are sort of connected together. The destruction of false religion and the attack by Gog and Magog comes from the king of the north initially, and it's caused by reports going from Jehovah to the king of the north. From what research I've done, it looks like one just kind of factors into the other. So we don't know, but in all probability, this whole thing is going to be over in about a half a heartbeat. One from start to finish. In all probability, it's going to be fast. Some think, some good, compassionate brothers and sisters think that Armageddon can't be too close because we haven't preached to everybody yet. We haven't reached every nation, every part of every nation yet. So God can't bring Armageddon, destroy people without letting them hear. Well, take a look at what Jesus Christ said about that. Go to Matthew 10. That's a good, loving, kind, tender, compassionate thought, but I'll tell you something is dead wrong. And Jesus Christ is the one that taught us this. When Jesus gave the command to preach the good news to his apostles, they, of course, taught us, they pictured the preaching we're going on today in the last days. They preached only to Israel. Israel, in this case, pictured the entire world of mankind today. Notice in verse 23, the instructions from Jesus Christ. He said, when they persecute you in one city, just flee to another. For truly I say to you, you by no means complete the circuit of the cities of Israel till the Son of Man arrives anyway. He said, if they get tough on you here, just run and go to someplace else and keep on preaching. Because count on it, he said, you're not going to get around the whole world anyway until the Son of Man arrives. Now, incidentally, the word arrives there is a Greek word, which I'm going to try to pronounce, but nonetheless, it's talking about arriving as Jehovah's executional officer at Armageddon. That's the meaning of the word. So he's not talking about arrives in his second presence. He did that in 1914. No. He's talking about arriving to bring Armageddon. It's not going to happen. We're not going to get to everybody. Now, others, too, very kindly, say that here for the past, decade or so, Jehovah's organization has been increasing at the rate of approximately 1/3 of a million every year. And it's true, we have that. So some very kind, loving souls rationalize and say God can't bring Armageddon when there's such tremendous growth. So many people streaming to his mountain of holy worship. Well, that's not true either. You just go back to last May, the May 2000 Kingdom Ministry front page. Answered that question. But they were simply referencing, let me give you a reference you might want to look up later. Watchtower of 11-15-76, page 689. It said, when this great tribulation strikes, Jehovah's advancing theocratic society is going to be a going concern, a go-forward organization, right down to that great tribulation. Because the worship of God, the Spirit of truth, is positive, enthusiastic, spirited, and progressive. So yeah, the fact is, when the Great Tribulation strikes, We might be out in service, knocking on doors. We'll still be having return visits. We'll be conducting Bible studies. We'll no doubt have Bible students coming to the Kingdom Hall with us, making progress towards becoming Jehovah's servants when the door comes flying shut. And they're not all the way inside. Thus, where are they? Outside. They are outside. So don't think, friends. Don't think because there's so much growth, he's going to hold it off. He's got an appointed time. And he never, ever changes his appointed time. It happens. Go to Revelation 19. One good soul here a while back said, man alive, I'm making so much money in this system of things that can't bring Armageddon down. I'm making too much money. I was just thinking about some time back now, a number of months back, I was watching Dan Rather's news, and he said that under Bill Clinton, he said the United States has experienced 9 years of unprecedented prosperity, and it's true. If you can't make money in Darlington, all you got to do is move to Detroit, and you can make money, or Chicago, or someplace. Money is to be made in the United States. Anybody can do it. Don't take any brains. All it takes is time. If you're willing to invest time, you can make money. That's what it takes. And that's what he's talking about. But go back and read once again verse 19 and 20 with me. This is talking about Armageddon. And it's also talking about Bill Clinton's government. 19 says, I saw the wild beasts and the kings of the earth and their armies gathered together to wage the war with the one seated on the horse, with his army. 20, and the wild beast was caught, and along with it the false prophet. Now remember what the false prophet was? United States and England, dual American world power. Okay? That performed in front of it the signs in which it misled those who received the mark of the wild beast, those who render worship to its image. Now get this, while still alive, they both were hurled into the fiery lake that burns with fire. Obviously that's a symbolism. But you get the picture? While still alive, they're destroyed. While what's still alive? The United States government and England. In other words, when the Great Tribulation strikes, friends, and those of us that come home from the work, maybe we sit down and watch the news, you know. I like to watch it with Dan Rather, but anyways, always got the stock market on there. Not that it means anything to me, but it's always the Dow Jones is going up or down, and the NASDAQ's going up or down or something. See, this government is still going to be functioning like it is right now. You all are going to be getting up in the morning, taking a shower, get up, go to work, eat your lunch, come home. This is going to be happening just like it is right now when the Great Tribulation strikes. The economic prosperity got nothing to do with it. It's just flat going to happen at God's appointed time. Okay? And so obviously, that being the case, and as long as this has been going on, smart thing to do is to make sure we're on the winning team, right? Get on Jehovah's side. Because right after the Great Tribulation is over, after Armageddon is over, Satan and his demons are going to be put into the abyss. And those of us that survive this thing are going to have a big cleanup job to do. So we don't want to take the attitude, go back to Zephaniah, the book of Zephaniah, chapter 1. We don't want to take the attitude that Jehovah God is delayed. He's not. There is a purpose in what he's doing. We need to have the attitude that Zephaniah had, and boy, he felt like the end of that system was close, and it was in his day, but nonetheless, this is speaking prophetically of our day in Armageddon. Now in verse 2 of Zephaniah 1, Jehovah kind of sets us up. He said, I shall without fail finish everything off the surface of the ground as the utterance of Jehovah. Now we don't have time to read all this, but he qualifies that. When he said everything, he was saying everything and everyone that's out of harmony with my will. It's not walking like I want to walk. Notice verse 6. He's still talking about destroying everybody. He said, and those who are drawing back from following Jehovah, and who have not sought Jehovah and have not inquired of him. So he's saying, I'm going to destroy everybody off the face of this earth that's not actively serving Jehovah God according to Jehovah's standards, not according to man's. Make sense? That's what he's talking about. Okay, in verse 7, his term for Armageddon is the day of Jehovah. See that? Now, he knew prophetically, when the last days got here, just before Armageddon, he knew there's going to be a bunch of good, honest, loving people come together and say, well, we got the truth. Praise the Lord, hallelujah, we got the truth. But there's so many other things that's fun to fill my time up out here with, that I think I'll just do that, and I'll give Jehovah a little tokenism here now and then, if it's comfortable. Notice in verse 12. He said, it must occur at that time that I shall certainly search Jerusalem with lamps. I'll give attention to the men who are congealing upon their graves and who are saying in their heart, Jehovah will not do good and he will not do bad. In other words, today, I hear the friends, I don't know if Armageddon's all that close or not, Man alive, I got this good job out here. I can make more money than I ever made in my life. But, on and on. That's what he's talking about. He's talking about us. Some of us doing that. Verse 14, there he calls it the great day of Jehovah. This is the way we ought to feel. It's near. It's near. There's a hurrying of it very much. And then in the next few verses he describes the seriousness, the fury that's going to exist during this Armageddon. And those ones who he's talking about fooling around in verse 12 because there's an opportunity to make some money. Notice verse 18. He said, neither the silver nor the gold going to be able to deliver them in the day of Jehovah's fury. It's just not going to work. Okay? The thing to do right now is to serve Jehovah. And that's what he tells us. We're in the time period immediately preceding Armageddon. We're in the before time period. That's why 4 times down there in verse 2, he tells us, he's talking directly about us. Notice verse 2 of chapter 2. So he said, before the statute gives birth to anything. See, before this thing starts, before the day has passed by just like it's half, before it gets to be too late, before there comes upon you people the burning anger of Jehovah, before there comes upon you the day of Jehovah's anger, here's what we got to do if we expect to survive. You better seek Jehovah, all you meek ones of the earth who have practiced his judicial decision. Seek righteousness and seek meekness. And if you do that, then probably you're going to be concealed in the day of the Lord's anger. They qualify that in the outline. Seek Jehovah says, study and pray for his guidance and mercy. Seek righteousness by bringing our lives into harmony with his requirements. Seek meekness by being humble and willing to make changes and adjustments in our lifestyle. So the counsel here, friends, really is to just stay close to Jehovah's organization. Gradually, Jehovah will cause them to know what we need to know in order to survive. They will gradually feed us more and more and more information. And those of us that apply it, put it into use, are going to survive. Those of us who don't, those of us who do like in verse 12, I don't know, I don't think Jehovah's going to do good, he's not going to do good. Forget it. Unless those individuals wake up and smell the roses, those ones are history, and it doesn't make a nickel of difference what we call ourselves, Jehovah's Witnesses or Baptists or Methodists or Catholics. It doesn't matter. Very plain, is it not, friend? So once again, if you don't learn anything else out of this discussion, if you don't remember anything, remember this. Armageddon, a good thing. Armageddon is a good thing. No one needs to be frightened of Armageddon. We have plenty of counsel from the faithful slave telling us what we need to do to be on Jehovah's side. All we have to do is to make practice of it, put it to use in our lives. So don't fear Armageddon, friends. It is a good thing. It's going to clean the earth up, clear the way for paradise. Well, that concludes that outline, friends. Thank you all for your kind attention. So we're going to have field service. We'll be here 2 days now for field service, so we'd enjoy having you all that can anyway come out and work with us. Meantime, let's all stand and we'll sing together Song 191. We'll have Brother Little come up and give thanks for it, please.